Hey everyone, what's up? This is Finite MTG, and today I am back bringing you all a draft of my Peasant Cube, which we did recently. And this was just a ton of fun. Always nice to draft a cube that I'm working on, and not only was the draft fun, but I had a blast in the matches too. So with that, let's dive right in. So pack one, pick one here. Of course, I know this cube pretty well, so I know pretty much what all these cards are here to do. One of the more powerful cards in the pack is Heartfire Immolator. Obviously, this is a card with prowess, and it's a wizard, meaning it's going to work nicely in that blue-red spells deck, not unlike the Spellweaver Eternal. But it also has an ability that can sacrifice it, which means if you can put it in red-black, there are some bonuses you can get for sacrificing it there as well. So this is definitely one of the cards I would consider for this pick, but I ended up going with Waker of Waves to start things off. So just like I mentioned, the Heartfire Immolator can go into multiple archetypes. This Waker of Waves is perfect in blue-black Reanimator. We have this Obsessive Stitcher, if that somehow ends up being something we're able to wheel. And then even if we don't, we can just put this in like a blue-green ramp deck. Use your Druids of the Cowl to just cast it a little bit earlier. There's a ton of flexibility on this card. It's very powerful. So that was what I started the draft with here. And keep in mind too, these packs are 13 cards. So this is a continuation of my past experiments to reduce pack size, because I really do not believe that 15 cards per pack is the right number, unless it's a set where you are drafting a bunch of lands, like a set with deserts or snow cards, or a set where you are drafting a bunch of lesson and learn cards. But my cube, you can see we do have some non-basic lands available to draft, but not very many. So I think 13 is probably the right number. With fewer non-basic lands, I would think 12 would probably be closer to the right number of cards per pack, but there are 13 here, so wheels are going to be a little bit off. Alright, so pack one, pick two now. Things are not super straightforward for us. There aren't any cards that scream super powerful here other than maybe Hidden Stockpile. And I'm not really into taking a gold card like that at this point. I think if I had taken a black or white card that would go in a Hidden Stockpile deck, then it would be kind of reasonable to take it here, but if I take the stockpile, I'm abandoning my first pick, really pigeonholing myself into black-white. And this is a card you would splash in my cube if you end up in red-black too, but it's just a little bit too narrow, even though it is powerful. So I ended up going here with Dusk Legion Zealot, which is not a card I would normally take this highly, but I like that it's basically good in any black deck. It's just a pretty solid card in general. I'm not missing out on very much here. We do have a couple dual lands. My Peasant Cube, by the way, now has rare mana fixing in it, which I think was also a really good decision. Even though it is a Peasant Cube and I am breaking the rules of having a Peasant Cube by putting rare lands in it, it's really important for the mana to work out, just for people to be able to play two color decks confidently and be able to splash if they're able to pick up the fixing as well. But yeah, we did take Dusk Legion Zealot out of this pack. And then up next here, this is another pretty lackluster pack. It's hard to figure out exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. One of the more powerful cards here is this Aerial Responder. And this card is good in the blue-white flyer archetype, of course. You see Kitesail Corsair and Ardenvale Tactician also in the pack for that archetype. It's also just a good card in any aggressive white deck, so something like Boros would be pretty happy with it too. But I ended up going here with this Bala Ged Recovery, because green is another color I would like to play. So my Sultai color pairs overlap really strongly in this cube. Basically, you're not going to want to play 7 drops outside of the Sultai color pairs if you can help it. And so with this Waker of Waves, I'm pretty happy if I can play it in a blue-green deck, like I mentioned earlier, that can ramp to it. But also if I can play it in a blue-black deck that can reanimate it. So with the Bala Ged Recovery, I open myself up to playing either black-green with that Dusk Legion Zealot or blue-green with the Waker of Waves. Alright, and then next here, unfortunately we're not seeing a ton for the Sultai color pairs that we have been discussing. So we see like an Umara Wizard that's pretty decent, and a Desert of the Mindful. Circle of the Moon Druid, I'm not sure about this card. A bunch of the inclusions from Adventures of the Forgotten Realms are pretty borderline. I think this one is still decent for the red-green Ferocious deck, but it might be a little bit too weak overall. There's a Cartouche of Ambition as well in the Sultai color pairs, but it's not really what I'm looking for. So I think I decided to go with the Chandra's Revolution here. It's very off-plan, but I think it's one of the better cards in the pack without pigeonholing me into a specific archetype like the Rockslide Sorcerer would. So I'm just trying to stay open and figure out which colors I'm supposed to be playing here. Alright, next up I have a pretty difficult pick here. 2 white, green, gold cards in the pack. They're both very good. I think I'm probably going to wheel something out of this pack. Yeah, I think I get 1 card out of this pack, something like that. And it's definitely tempting for me to try to take this Ironroot Warlord and see if I can get the Conclave Cavalier last pick. But I ended up going here with this Aven Initiate. It's a pretty decent card. Works in the blue-white Flyers decks, of course, but I'm more interested in the fact that it has Embalm, and it's just like a fine evasive body. So if I do end up in some kind of blue-black strategy where I'm manipulating my graveyard, then that Embalm becomes more valuable. And in blue-green ramp as well, the 7 mana is a little more realistic to achieve. Alright, so next up here, we start really seeing some signals. 2 good, really good green cards in the pack, the Crawl Harpooner and the Cartouche of Strength. But I'm really in for this Eternal Skylord. It's doing almost exactly what I want, just a powerful blue card that puts 2 things onto the battlefield. And I do want to play blue at this point. It's, I think, will be my 3rd blue card I've drafted, so I'm really trying to solidify myself into a blue member of the Sultai color pairs here. Alright, and then next up here, we have a really difficult pick. So we have Temple of Malady, which is something that I could use to splash if that was something that was on my radar. Otherwise, I have Reign of Revelation and Wander in Death. So Wander in Death, really nice flexible card if I am going to be playing black, but I'm not totally sure about that just yet. And the Reign of Revelation is also quite powerful and plays well with counterspells, of course, but also can discard like 2 Embalm, and that's pretty nice too. You can put your Waker of Waves in the graveyard that way, even though Waker of Waves, you probably don't ever want to discard it to this because it has another flexible way of putting it in the graveyard. But I did decide to go with the Reign of Revelation. 4 mana is a little bit clunky, but the fact that it's an instant and has a lot of versatility put it slightly over the Wander in Death for me. Now we see this pack with a bunch of Naya cards, and it's pretty difficult for me to make a good pick out of this one. I could take this Imperial Aerosaur because it is the only white card in the pack, and it's a pretty good one too. Not sure why it's here so late. But I believe I ended up going with this Memorial to Unity, thinking that, okay, well, if I do end up playing green, this is going to be a card I want in the deck. It's just going to make what I'm doing better. Whereas, like, Soroform Hybrid, yes, I mean, it's good in the red-green deck, it's fine in the blue-green deck, but it's nothing special for the blue-green deck. So I'd rather just have that Memorial, try to upgrade my lands when I can. Alright, well, part of the reason I took that Memorial last pick is because I thought that the Obsessive Stitcher had not wheeled, and somehow it has, and this Stitcher is very good. There are only a few ways of reanimating things in this cube. One of them is blue-black, as you can see, we're looking at it. One of them is green-black, that's back for more. And then I believe right now there are 3 uncommon black sorceries for 5 mana that reanimate things. Also in the pack, Heartfire Immolator, which, you know, if it were me, I would have taken this card second out of the pack, so really no idea what it's still doing here. Maybe not everyone knows how good the blue-red deck is. I mean, it certainly seems to be that way with the Spellweaver Eternal still in the pack as well. But yeah, very happy and surprised to get this late Obsessive Stitcher. Again, the wheels are weird with 13 card packs. It's easy to think that something didn't wheel and then all of a sudden you're looking at that. Alright, then pack 1, pick 10 here. We have a couple red cards. We're not really interested in them, even though they're both fine. Curious Obsession, mainly here for the blue-white deck, but also can trigger Prowess in blue-red, be a pretty annoying card there. But I ended up going here with this Temple of Silence. I'm not confident that I'm splashing white, but just the fact that it's a scry land means it's among the best of the dual lands at rare. And just for that reason alone, I might play it as kind of a tapped swamp that scries one. Alright, and then here we have 2 red cards once again. I'll be taking the Kitesail Corsair, though it doesn't really fit in this kind of deck. You would like to be playing it in a deck with a Curious Obsession, for instance. But, yeah. Alright, and then pack 1, pick 12 here. I'm just going to take another dual land. This is going to let me splash white pretty easily, now that I have 2 black-white duels, and that's definitely pretty interesting for us. Like, there are some things I would consider splashing in kind of an Esper deck, and Circle of the Moon Druid is not really looking appealing. Alright, we do get this Scrounging Bandar here. 13th pick. Alright, so now pack 2, pick 1, we're faced with a pretty difficult decision. I know one of the drafters sitting near me has been drafting blue because they've been chatting about it. It's kind of a weird medium level of what we're allowed to share with each other during this draft. You don't want to give away too much, but it's also fun to be able to talk when you're with people, you know. So for me here, I'm pretty committed to blue-black after wheeling that 3-mana 0/3. It's going to help me reanimate things. So I'm looking at Geist of the Archives. Would really love if this thing said Surveil 1 instead of Scry 1. That would be almost perfect. But it's still a pretty powerful card. Has utility pretty similar to the old Scryfish in that it's a blocker that also helps you manipulate your library. And we have 2 pretty decent black cards here in Spark Harvest and Crypt Lurker. Crypt Lurker is a pretty cool card because it works well in every black deck. Even though it's not the most powerful card, it is a really flexible one. And so I'm hoping here that there will just be one black drafter taking this Spark Harvest, and then I'll actually be able to wheel this Crypt Lurker. So did take the Geist here. Alright. Pack 2, pick 2. I think what I ended up going here was that Choked Estuary. So this card is just pretty good as a dual land. In general, you want to pick up the double uncolored dual lands pretty highly. Another option for me would have been Chemist's Insight as a pretty powerful blue card. And the fact that Jumpstart does kind of work in a reanimation strategy is pretty interesting too. Liliana's Devotee is not something I would be able to take advantage of. That's a much better fit in the black-red and black-white decks, as you could probably infer by the 2 gold cards here in this pack. And the black-green duel is not super appealing to me either at this point. So Estuary for me, moving on to the next one. Alright, so this was a very difficult pick for me because I would really like to take that Night Veil Sprite. The fact that it does Surveil 1 repeatedly is pretty powerful, but I'm also lacking ways to interact with creatures, and there's only 1 black card in the pack, so I can try to do that trick where I take a card of the color that shows up less and see if I can wheel one of these. It's not very likely to work, but I did narrowly decide to go with Deadweight over either of the blue cards, which I do feel was probably a disciplined choice, even though, again, that Sprite would have been great in my deck. Alright, and then here we have another interesting choice. So I can take the Capture Sphere as just a medium removal spell, or I can take Air Cult Elemental, not really ever considering Dread Malkin. And the Air Cult Elemental is one of the cards from AFR that I do think is probably a good fit for this cube. It's very much like Angler Drake, which has already been a really powerful card in this cube, and that 2/5 body I think is pretty nice too. And so even though I'm not totally sure I'm going to be able to reanimate things very reliably, I did decide to go with the Air Cult Elemental. Capture Sphere, even though it's decent, it's really not the best removal spell. And the Air Cult is a cool new card that I'm hoping to try, even if I am making my curve a little bit too high with it. Alright, and then we have this pick, and I spent a very long time on this pack. So we have Lazotep Reaver, which is not really something I'm interested in, but is just generally a good card. We have Skull Prophet, which would work really nicely in that green-black reanimation strategy. But we are looking at Essence Extraction as a powerful removal spell, Farika's Spawn as just an excellent black card, and Cauldron's Gift as a really good reanimation spell. So at this point, I don't think there's any kind of shenanigans I can do trying to wheel something I want. I think only one card is coming back in this pack, so it's probably going to be a gold card. The Cauldron's Gift really does what I'm hoping this deck will be able to do, especially since I just picked up that Air Cult Elemental, and I am hoping to be able to reanimate that Waker of Waves pretty reliably. And Farika's Spawn, even though it is an excellent card, very hard to answer. I already do have some effects that are in a similar place on the curve, and the Cauldron's Gift is just not really something I can replace. In these blue, black, and green, black reanimation decks, you really have to take all the reanimation effects you see, because it's really easy to compete with someone over them. And they're just, like I mentioned, are not very many in the cube. So took the Cauldron's Gift. Very sad to pass the Farika Spawn and the Essence Extraction, even though the Extraction's a little bit rough on this deck's mana. We'll see if that pays off for me. Alright, and then next up here, speaking of rough on the mana, we have 4 mana Price of Fame, or sort of 4 mana Bloodchief's Thirst. And in general, I think Price of Fame is probably a better card. There are even an increasing number of legends in this cube, which means that you are going to be able to pay 2 mana for Price of Fame some of the time. But the thing about Bloodchief's Thirst is it works as a cheap removal spell in a more reliable way than Price of Fame does. And yes, it does have double black when you factor in the kicker, but the fact that it can stabilize and sort of work as a fatal push is really important for me, because right now my curve is pretty high. I just want to be able to make sure I can survive until the later turns in the game. So I did go with the Bloodchief's Thirst here over the Price of Fame. Now we have a pretty rough pick for me. So we have Back for More going pretty late. This is a really powerful reanimation spell. And we have Gourmand, which is not the best card for the sacrifice decks, even though it kind of seems like it would be decent. You really just don't want to be casting a 6 mana card in those decks. And this is mainly in here as a reanimation target, because it's a pretty powerful thing to reanimate, and you don't have to pay that additional cost when you're reanimating it. Howling Giant, also a very powerful card to be in the pack this late. But we ended up going here with a Mystic Subdual. Once again, I'm just worried about trying to survive in the early game, and Back for More is something I would take if I already had my mana fixing picked up, if I already had my early game solidified, or maybe just if this was pack 1. But none of those things are the case, so taking a Mystic Subdual to try to really shore up that early game. Alright, we get rewarded here now with another great reanimation target in the City Watch Sphinx. This thing is pretty large. You hope it doesn't die, of course, and give you that Surveil too, but if it does, that's just an additional bit of value for this kind of deck. There is an Unsummon in the pack. That's not really something we're looking for. Unsummon is a great card for the blue-red and blue-white decks, the aggressive blue decks, basically. But yeah, with the City Watch Sphinx, we are getting exactly what this kind of deck wants. All right, in pack 2, pick 9, we get the very card we were hoping for the first time around, the Crypt Lurker. Again, not the best card in the cube by any stretch, but I do think it has a really great place in the cube, simply because it fits so well into any black deck. It's really easy for a card to fit well into 2 archetypes in this cube, but it's much more difficult for a card to fit into 4 archetypes of its respective color in this cube. Most removal spells are cards that would do that, in my opinion, but Crypt Lurker, yeah, it's an exception in the versatility. A little bit like Bone Shards, but unfortunately, cards from MH2 are not able to make my cube here. Alright, and then here we have pretty nice wheel for us as well. We have Durable Coil Bug. This is another black card that pretty much works well in all the black strategies, because in the reanimation decks, you are trying to discard things, you're trying to mill yourself, and that gives the Coil Bug some value. And it also works pretty well with the sacrifice things. Reassembling Skeleton is a card I used to have in this cube, but the fact that you could recur it for just 2 mana directly to the battlefield made it way too powerful for the sacrifice decks. So I think Coil Bug is actually a really nice medium. I like the fact that it doesn't enter the battlefield tapped when you cast it. I think it would be much worse if it did, even though it does cost 7 mana total to recur and cast it. Alright, and then pack 2, pick 11 here. We didn't wheel. I think there were a couple blue cards that we were looking at, but we do get an Overgrown Tomb. And I've mentioned the Sultai colored pairs a few times by now. We are thinking that if there's a color we wanted to splash, it would be green more likely than white, for instance, because green is just trying to do some similar things. Say, for instance, we took the back for more, then we could pick up this black-green pathway and the black-green shockland and then be pretty happy with ourselves, but I'm also pretty happy with how things are going here. Alright, then we get a Vastwood Fortification. These should not go as late as they do. You always want to take these MDFCs if you can, in my opinion. And then here we have Goblin Javelineer. This is a card from AFR, not a very powerful one, but it is a hasty 1-drop. We're always looking for more 1-drop options that can be playable. Can trade with 2-drops, which is kind of nice, makes it better than a Raging Goblin. And it does have that Warrior subtype as well, which is something I've been trying to support this time around for red-white, though I'm not totally sure whether that's something I'd like to continue trying to support. And then pack 2, pick 13, here we get this Skull Prophet, which unfortunately is not something we're going to splash for, simply by virtue of it being 2 mana. Alright, and then pack 3, pick 1 here. Always a tough decision when you have really good lands, like if near dead lands in the pack. It's kind of funny too. It has dead lands in the name and you're sacrificing lands to it, so the lands do become dead. We have Curate in the pack, which is a nice cantrip effect. I'm always talking about how I would love an instant speed strategic planning to be printed, and although this isn't quite that, it is a pretty nice effect, particularly for the blue-black reanimation deck. So we'd be happy to play this if it came around. Blue-red spells deck would probably also be happy with that one. That said, we are going to take this Banewhip Punisher. The fact that this thing is on a creature makes it extremely powerful in this cube, because it's much easier to recur creatures than recur spells. So, for instance, think Wander in Death from pack 1, targeting Banewhip Punisher and something else. This card is just very powerful. A lot of versatility too. You can kill an X1 and then keep your 2/2 around. You can even use it to combo with something else that puts -1/-1 counters on something. So very happy with the Punisher here. Alright, and then a difficult pick for me here. We have Riddle Form, which is an excellent card, though it is a more aggressive card than what I'm hoping for. And we have Winged Words, which, although it is a nice card as well, we don't have a ton of cheap creatures with flying, which means realistically this is going to be difficult for us to cast. We do have an Omen of the Sea, however, and there are no black cards in this pack. So Omen of the Sea as just a blue card that's going to look good in any blue deck, yeah, it's easily going to be our choice here. Alright, and now we have a pretty difficult pick. We have Bleeding Edge versus Labyrinth Guardian versus Tatyova. So Labyrinth Guardian is a nice card for this deck, right? As a defensive statted card, which we can also embalm, which means, you know, if it dies or if we just mill it or discard it, we get a bit of value there. Tatyova is not something I'm convinced I'm going to be able to put in this deck. Unfortunately, I think I have maybe one black-green dual land in that Overgrown Tomb, so not very much fixing at this point. But Bleeding Edge is just a really nice card. Yes, it's a little bit rough on the mana, but it's basically a 2/2 that gives something -2/2, so almost an FTK kind of effect. And yeah, it's just not something I'm willing to pass here. Alright, and then we have a difficult choice here. Pack 3, pick 4. We have a Desert, and the deserts are always appealing. But we also have a Mire's Grasp and an Omen Speaker. Omen Speaker fills a place on the curve that we don't really have anything in yet in terms of cheap creatures. However, Mire's Grasp is kind of like a leveled up Deadweight, is still going to be a really nice choice for us. Kills many more things than Deadweight does. And yeah, it's just a really nice removal spell, so apologies to the Desert and the Omen Speaker, but taking the Mire Grasp here. Alright, and then this was another difficult pick for me, because we'd be happy with basically any of the blue or black cards in this pack other than Night Squad Commando, which really belongs in that black-white or black-red kind of sacrifice crossover. So we have Erratic Visionary, which I'm really interested in as just a way of blocking in the early game and looting. Looting is so powerful when you're trying to reanimate things, and with 2 reanimation effects, we are pretty squarely in that reanimation archetype. Splendid Agony, pretty good removal spell, works nicely against the token decks. Spellkeeper Weird, mainly in here for blue-red, but wouldn't be horribly embarrassing if it ended up in our deck as well. But I did decide to go with a Water Knot here. So Water Knot just being a decent removal spell, a little bit rough on the mana, once again. But the fact that it does lock things down for 3 mana is really nice, and I'm hoping to wheel that Erratic Visionary. Thinking maybe someone will take the Spellkeeper Weird over that, and then I'll get the Visionary back. Alright, now pack 3, pick 6. Speaking of rough on the mana, we have 2 double blue cards in the pack. We also have a Trial of Knowledge. And this trial is better in blue-black than the other decks because, you know, we do take advantage of discarding cards pretty well. That said, we have 0 cartouches, very little time to pick them up. I remember we already passed, I think, both the black cartouche and the green cartouche. I think we even passed the blue cartouche, so really not very likely to pick up any cartouches. And Neutralize, even though it is rough on the mana, is just a card you can cycle in a pinch. It's a really powerful, versatile effect. It makes cards like Reign of Revelation better because now we have some options leaving mana open on the opponent's turn, so pretty happy with the Neutralize in this kind of deck. Alright, and now we have a pretty clear choice. Slimebind is a fine effect if you're not making your opponent sacrifice creatures, but I'm really happy here with a Clear Water Pathway. Just another blue-black dual land to try to smooth my mana out, because the last few picks have really made things more difficult on us, so Pathway makes things a little easier. And speaking of, now we have another pathway, this Bark Channel Pathway. And this time I'm taking this thinking, okay, well, we did see that Tatyova. What are the chances it comes back around? And if it does, now we have that black-green duel and this blue-green duel, and it's something we could actually put into our deck. The other thing is we don't have to be as concerned with being able to cast something like Tatyova, because we can discard it, we can loot it away if we can't, and maybe we can even reanimate it. So the pathway is a nice kind of hedge toward being able to wheel and main deck that Tatiova. Alright, then I don't remember what I took here because none of these cards are making my deck. I believe actually I took the Swiftwater Cliffs, just another way of kind of hedging into things. Even though there's nothing specific I'm hoping to run that's red, just seems like a decent card for us, and we can leave these remaining Gruul cards in the pack for the other drafters. Alright, and then 3 gold cards in this pack. It's very unlikely that someone's going to be able to take advantage of all of them. So we ended up going here with this white card, basically just a mild hate draft. It's possible that one Gruul drafter plays Frenzied Earrings or Targnar, but it's unlikely that they're both going to get run. And then even that Sphinx of New Prov can be pretty challenging to cast, so we'll see what happens with that. Alright, and then pack 3, pick 11. We have a surprisingly difficult pick here. So we have that Cartouche of Knowledge. We already talked about the Trial, and how that's not really on the menu for us. But we do have that Labyrinth Guardian, which is definitely a card that this deck would like. Would be a really disciplined pick. However, we do have a couple dual lands that produce green mana. And Tatiova is just such a powerful card. Very surprised to see it here, 11th pick. Of course, it is pack 3, so it does get more difficult to slot something like this into your deck. But I'm always happy to take something like Tatiova in my blue-black reanimation deck here. And here, I think we get a Lead the Stampede. Again, same logic as a couple picks ago, just trying to make it so there are not very many playable cards in the pack left. Lead the Stampede, not something we're interested in playing, but more drafters would be interested in that than this Kargan War Leader, which really goes into a specific build of red-white. And then pack 3, pick 13, here we get Spellkeeper Weird, which is not the erratic visionary I was hoping for, but it is still a card that can make our deck, so I'm pretty happy about that. Alright, and so this is the deck we ended up building after the draft. So I think this deck, really, it would be very difficult to misbuild it. One possibility for that would be running the Temple of Silence main deck over a Swamp, and I did end up making the classic mistake of not adding a Swamp to my sideboard in case I wanted to swap that temple out. You should always just add basics to your sideboard in these freeform events. It's really annoying because normally in limited Magic you're able to add an arbitrarily high number of basics during sideboarding, but freeform is considered constructed on Magic Online, so unfortunately it doesn't let you do that. But the curve looks good, the mana looks really good. Let's see, how many blue sources do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then black sources we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 3 green sources too. So really good numbers of sources of everything. That's going to help things out a lot because we do have some pretty constraining mana requirements. So pretty happy about this deck. We'll see how it does in the matches. Right. So we are back here with game 1 of round 1, and looks like we get to be on the play. This hand is pretty sketchy, but we do have that Waker of Waves to try to smooth things out. I think I decided to keep this. Yeah, it's a pretty bold keep. We have 0 black sources, 2 5-mana cards, and Waker of Waves, we can just say it's 2 mana, but I'm going to need the top of my library to be pretty kind to me for this hand to work out well. So opponents on white, which is bad news for me, because they're probably playing an aggressive deck, but the good news is there's no 1-drop, and we do find a second blue source for the Water Knot. So I believe here I'm just planning on using this Waker of Waves, and it is important that we go turn 2 island for that Water Knot, because let's say we Waker here and find a black source, we're going to want to play that black source this coming turn, so then maybe we can hit double black. So basically we just don't want to play that forest. Opponent is on red-white, one of the most aggressive decks, and not very much action yet, like I mentioned, which is pretty good for us. We find Swamp and Banewhip Punisher, and unfortunately cannot take the Punisher here, but we do find second Swamp off the top, so punished by not taking the Punisher, of course. Even though having 5 lands there's definitely some value to that. So opponent has Anax here, which the Bleeding Edge cannot kill, but we can lock that down with the Water Knot, which is pretty appealing at this point. And yeah, we do find another land. So we'll Water Knot the Anax. Next turn we're looking to play that Eternal Skylord, and we can also reanimate that Waker of Waves if that's something we're interested in. And so we draw a Durable Coil Bug here. Coil Bug, not super relevant. We can't get Adamant, by the way, for the Cauldron's Gift, if that's something we're interested in, but I don't think it is. I play an island here, which actually I think should be the forest, just in case we draw Tatiova, because then next turn we'd like to be able to play Tatiova and then play our land drop immediately. But I do go for this Cauldron's Gift. We get back the Waker of Waves, and the opponent now has a lowly 0-1 compared to our 8-8. There are some ways that they have to exile it, so it's not like the game is just straight up over. They do have Basri's Acolyte, which is a pretty powerful card, but they can't really leverage it very well here. And then now, I think I just dropped this Eternal Skylord. I'm just trying to put a bunch of board presence in. I guess I go for an attack first. But yeah, no need to play that unkicked Bloodchief's Thirst. There's not even anything that could hit other than my zombie token, so that doesn't seem very good. So here we try to trade with the Eternal Skylord. I imagine they have some kind of combat trick or similar here. Not too worried about that though. The Skylord is not an important part of our plan to win the game. And there's a chance we'd just be able to reanimate it or something anyway. So they trade Pride of Conquerors for really half of the Skylord. So that's just really good news for us. They have Incendiary Oracle, which it's not really able to trade for this Waker of Waves very reasonably, but it is just a very good card in the matchup, in that it's a main deckable card that can send things to the exile zone. So that's one that we might have to worry about. So now we draw Reign of Revelation. Let's see what my play is here. I think I just attack with the Waker and leave the zombie army back. No, it looks like the zombie army's getting in there as well. Opponent decides to chump with the Oracle, which probably makes sense from them, rather than falling to like 2 life. They get a 0-1 that can't block for Anax. And then we go for a Coil Bug here, and I think we just pass, holding up this Reign of Revelation. So opponent has Hungry Flames, dealing a couple damage to me and killing my Coil Bug, which can come back, of course, as Magic Online will remind us. And the opponent is going to get in for 1 point of lifelink. The idea here being that I have 10 power on the board, but they're going to 11 life, so I can't quite kill them. Or can I? So they mention they're hoping that I don't have some random way to amass. Bit of foreshadowing there. So here, what do we discard? I think it's like Geist or something. No, looks like we discarded the Crypt Lurker just because it was expensive. But we now do get to Bleeding Edge here to kill that Siege Striker, and then suddenly we have 12 power because of that amass. And so, yeah, we do have the random way to amass, and with it, we do have lethal damage here. Alright, back for game 2. Pretty slow hand against a red-white aggro opponent, but we do have some pretty good mana with this hand. Missing double black, but powerful mix of lands and spells. Play our Overgrown Tomb tapped, and we get hit by this monitor a couple times, and they have the Honored Crop Top here in the 3-2 for 2 mana that when it attacks pumps their other creatures, and it's also a warrior for that warrior sub-theme that I'm encouraging. And here we go, just a Mystic Subdual on that thing. It's still a 1-2, unfortunately, which means it's going to be able to peck in for some damage, but that was a pretty good draw from us. Obviously, you know, it's not a 3-2 anymore, so we're reducing the damage output there, but it also doesn't have that ability where it pumps other attacking creatures, so that's pretty important for us here. Opponent has a Gust Walker and missing a land drop. So now the only thing we can do for 3 mana is hold up this neutralize. They still get to hit us for 4 here. Presumably they're not going to exert with no real incentive to. Yeah, they choose not to. But we get to counter an Incendiary Oracle, which could get out of hand. So not the worst thing to be able to counter. And frankly, we're countering anything. We're probably countering a 1/1 for 1 there. Maybe not quite, but you get the idea. So now we get to drop this Crypt Lurker, get to loot away, or rummage away rather, one of our reanimation targets. And it's difficult to choose which one I would like to reanimate versus just being a little bit closer to casting. I do have the Cauldron's Gift now, which means if we find any land, we are going to be able to reanimate something. I think I'd go with the Sphinx here, yeah. And so now, unfortunately, with this tap land, we're not going to be able to reanimate next turn, necessarily. But it looks like the damage output isn't too bad. The opponent's not using the Hall Monitor yet, but they are playing a Kenra Scrapper, which is scary for us. But fortunately, we do find a Myers Grasp, which is able to take care of that one. I believe we topped that island with the Temple, and that's going to allow us to just cast that Air Cult Elemental if we want to next turn. We can also just reanimate the City Watch Sphinx. Opponent spends a couple mana to get in a damage, and they have an Underworld Ragehound. And so I think I just go for the Air Cult Elemental here. Yep. And I think my play is to bounce the Gustwalker now that it hasn't been exerted recently. And this means that even if the opponent uses the Hall Monitor on the Air Cult, I can still use Crypt Lurker to block that Underworld Ragehound. And that is what ends up happening here. We have to try to eat the 3/1. It's just dealing us too much damage as opposed to the 1/2. Opponent does have Pride of Conquerors to trade, and their Ragehound does get to come back now that they have 3 other cards in the graveyard. But here, I think I just go for a Cauldron's Gift. Yeah, and it looks like I'm careful to get the Adamant turned on. Hopefully find like a Waker of Waves or something. But it looks like we just get a large City Watch Sphinx, which is also pretty good. And I spend a lot of turns in this game not attacking, even when I feel like I might be able to, just because there are so many random things that can kill me from 6 life. So the opponent recasts their Underworld Ragehound. They still have 4 cards in hand, which is pretty scary. We get Eternal Skylord, so now we have a bunch of blockers. Potentially could have attacked with the City Watch Sphinx there, but I'm going to be pretty happy I didn't. Now that they're able to do this, and I think they locked down the Air Cult, so things would be so much worse for me here if I had attacked. They could maybe exile the Air Cult and just prevent something else from blocking. But we trade with the Amass token, which is not the worst trade for us. And so here, Reign of Revelation is going to find some lands. There's always a temptation to discard the Coil Bug to something like a Reign of Revelation, but these lands aren't actually doing us very much good either. So I think it's totally fine to just pitch a land and keep the Coil Bug as cheap as possible for right now. We get to Banewhip Punisher, put a counter on the Fairgrounds Warden, which means we're going to be able to get our City Watch Sphinx back. And we do decide to just go for that, crack on the Banewhip Punisher right away. If they have something like, I think Adamant Will would be one way of punishing us. Feat of Resistance would be another way of punishing us because that Banewhip ability does require you to target. So here we, I believe, don't go for an attack yet, or maybe the City Watch Sphinx comes in. Nope. Oh, okay. So my idea here is just I want to leave my flying blockers back against this Gustwalker, so I'm just going to start getting in for 3 on the ground with this Skylord. And I get this Coil Bug. So yeah, the ground here is pretty locked up, and I'm trying to make sure I have the air secure as well. And so the opponent locks down my Air Cult Elemental here, exerts the Gustwalker, and then I block here with the City Watch Sphinx. Unfortunately, they sack their thing to make their creature indestructible, and then they cast Kabira Takedown, so they just, I think, miscounted how many creatures they had, because if they had done this differently, right, they could have prevented the Elemental from blocking and then play the Takedown on the City Watch Sphinx. And of course, they were super aware of that as this was happening, but I mean, mistakes like this happen. I make them all the time, so. Surveil a swamp to the graveyard and put a Water Knot on top. And that's going to allow me to lock down the Hall Monitor, which feels like a weird choice to tap as opposed to the Gustwalker, but it's going to let me get a little bit more aggressive, I think. I do go for an attack with all here, just trying to trade 7 damage for 1, and by attacking for 7 here, I do put them on a 2-turn clock. So there's definitely some value in that. Now the opponent goes for, I think it's the Rage Hound again? Yeah, it looks like it. So Rage Hound comes back once again. They play out another land. So they have 1 card in hand. That 1 card could really be anything, which is a pretty big issue for me. So I could make an attack that would threaten lethal here, forcing them to trade with their Underworld Rage Hound, and they presumably trade with the Skylord, meaning they take 4 damage, they're down to 3, so a little bit unfortunate that their life total would be 3, because then my creatures are not lethal threats. But I drew Obsessive Stitcher, which is a pretty good card, and also playing a slow game here just favors me, because with 1 card in hand and 3 mana open, I could lose to a removal spell somehow, or like a lightning strike off the top of their deck, something like that, by messing up here. So the opponent goes for just the most aggressive attack. So we make the blocks that seem to make sense. I think they go for something to prevent their creature from dying, something like that. Oh, okay, they go for a Hungry Flames, which is very scary here. Brings me down to 3 life and gets rid of my Obsessive Stitcher. And then they also have Make a Stand, which means their Underworld Rage Hound is now going to survive. But that's not too bad for me. It doesn't kill the Air Cult Elemental, and I can still get that Coil Bug back. So I think that Honored Crop Captain is probably supposed to attack too, with the Make a Stand. They're maybe able to clear my Eternal Skylord if I block in a strange way. Probably not, but maybe. And so here, I think I get to just play a couple creatures. I think the Skylord attacks, but I don't think I attack with the Air Cult Elemental. Yeah. And so now with a couple blockers, I'm feeling pretty good about my position here. Any 2 creatures are lethal threats. The opponent has to attack with the Rage Hound, I believe. Yeah, I block with the Air Cult. Thinking about blocking with the Coil Bug, trying to figure out whether they have any kind of trample tricks that could punish me for not doing that. I mean, basically, as long as they didn't top deck Lightning Strike, I'm fine. But I do end up just making the courageous block, if you will. And they play a Tawkrop Elite. So they're actually dead on board now, because like I said, any 2 of my creatures are lethal. But wouldn't be complete if I couldn't cast Tatiova and draw a card. So we do that, we find the Bloodchief's Thirst. We actually mistapped here, so we don't have double black anymore, but we can still remove a blocker. Now we have more than lethal here, which is just going to work for us nicely. And yeah, that's game. Alright, so this time we are back against Crackshot, aka Jakob, the co-host of my podcast. He knows this cube very well. He's drafted it almost every time with me, I think. And yeah, he has a history of doing very well in it. He's always done well in my cube drafts, though. It seems like he knows my formats pretty well. And so I start with this 1-lander here, which unfortunately I cannot keep. And then I'm given this really awkward hand where I don't have double black, but I kind of have to keep, so put an island to the bottom and just hope that things are going to be okay. Starts with a Blood Crypt, and I start with scrying into a Spellkeeper Weird, which, yes, is an early blocker, but it's not really something I'm interested in picking up here. I'd rather try to find a better card or just a swamp. Then he has Kitesail Freebooter to take that Bleeding Edge, which is pretty annoying for me. But I do find a Bloodchief's Thirst, which I fire off right away, just because I'm going to take some incidental damage from that Freebooter, and I'm going to be able to kill something of a similar size and make a creature once I do find my second black source. There's Orzhov Enforcer. Here we just play an island and pass. And there's Malefic Scythe, which is a very powerful card in Crackshot's deck, and a huge problem for me. Now you see the Bleeding Edge does not work on that Orzhov Enforcer, just as we find the swamp. So now we're forced to pass with way more lands in our hand than we would like. Opponent goes for a Rimrock Knight, which is pretty bad for us, and re-equips to the Rimrock Knight as well. And so that Scythe is going to grow in terms of the counters on it based on whatever we kill. So if we do go for the Bleeding Edge on that Rimrock Knight, then the Scythe is going to be even more powerful, and that means if it equips to the Enforcer, it's a 3/4 Death Touch, and that's not really something I'm equipped to deal with, if you excuse the pun there. So we do decide to go here for a Bleeding Edge on the Orzhov Enforcer. Yes, we do give the opponent a 1/1, which is going to be pretty good with that Scythe, but we also create a 2/2, which can trade for that Rimrock Knight, which I think is just like pretty reasonable from this position. So the opponent does want to get that counter on the Scythe and make this trade, so it happens. So now they can suit up that flyer. It is a 3/3. And we just keep finding lands here, unfortunately, but we are able to play the Skylord. Opponent now has an equip on their Fireblade Artist, which is going to have a good, or at least a decent attack here. Spirit does not attack into the zombie army, and we do double block here. They kill the Skylord, so if they had instant speed removal, we would almost just lose, but we can't really afford to play around that with how many lands we've drawn. And yeah, now they have a 4/4 flyer, which is also looking pretty problematic. Fortunately, though, I do find Waker of Waves just in time to hit 7 mana. So here I cast it. I'm potentially able to race that flyer is now a 3/4 as opposed to a 4/4. And that's pretty important. And a post-combat Forbidden Friendship, which is always kind of funny. And we see a soldier get suited up just so if I attack with a Waker of Waves, that Spirit is going to be a little bigger after re-equipping. So here I just go for a Crypt Lurker. I decide that I don't need that zombie army very much, so I'm going to sacrifice that. And I find a Tatyova here, which is going to be important starting next turn. I go for an attack for 7 here. I am a little bit worried about that Spirit getting out of hand, but I do need to pressure my opponent, either their life total or their board state, or I'm just going to die to the Spirit in a few turns here. So now the Spirit deals me 4 damage, I'm down to 6 life. And yeah, things are looking pretty rough. I do find a Dusk Legion Zealot, which I cast before the Tatyova because I want to have more flexibility with my mana, say if I find an expensive removal spell. That was not exactly what we were looking for, but now we get to play the Tatyova, gain that life back. We are up to 6 now, and really importantly here we find a Mire's Grasp. So we can't Mire's Grasp right now, we're too low on mana, but I am going to be able to Mire's Grasp next turn. And I imagine I still had Deadweight in my deck, which means I think I must have mistapped here, probably. Anyway, so if I attack with the Waker of Waves, I don't quite die on board, because sure, they block with the Dinosaur, they put a 5th counter on the Scythe, they can hit me down to 1 life, which is pretty precarious. But I actually really need this Dinosaur, at least some other blocker to stay in play. So if the opponent re-equips to that other blocker, I'll be able to kill the spirit next turn. So that's what my plan is here. And so they do go for this. They attack me for 4. And again, there are a bunch of things I could die to once I'm at 2 life like this. They go for a Brazen Wolves, which is a good card, but not a very synergistic one for them. And here I find a Neutralize, which is actually really important for me. So Tatyova, I play a land for that and draw a card. I find a Deadweight. That's perfect because now I can Deadweight the Spirit. I can Mire's Grasp the Wolves. And then I actually kind of had things locked up here with that Neutralize. So I'm able to attack for 7. Opponent can't really block. Opponent attacks for 4. I'm considering a double block because, yes, I would lose the Tatyova, but I can pretty much make sure I don't get 2 for 1 because I do have that Neutralize. That said, that 1/1 really isn't doing anything for me, so I just decide to throw that away and chump. Opponent now has a Havoc Jester, which is a pretty strong card in the red-black sacrifice deck. And we decide to counter that. And so the opponent mentions the fact that I have 13 damage, they're at 13 life, but I don't want to mess things up, so we'll draw a card. We'll draw some more cards. We don't find another counterspell, but we do find just more ways to use our mana here, so we go Omen of the Sea. I think we find another 2 mana effect as well. Yeah, Mystic Subdual. So just in case anything goes wrong, now we have that. And we get to attack and deal lethal damage out of nowhere. Losing almost that whole game, and then all of a sudden we're just able to chain some removal spells together and get back in it. Alright, back here for game 2. So this is a bit of a clunky hand. Once again, 5 lands, but we do have Omen of the Sea this time. Our mana is better than it was in the previous game, so this might actually be a better keep. But opponent has an early Fireblade Artist, which is pretty rough for me. And yeah, I do get to cast Omen of the Sea during their turn, which I'm going to do in response to this Kitesail Freebooter. And fortunately for me, there are no awkward decisions about having a non-creature spell on top that I would like to keep, but then another card that I wouldn't like to keep, and topping the spell into the Freebooter and bottoming the other. Don't have to worry about any of that nonsense. So I'm just able to top an Obsessive Stitcher here. Freebooter doesn't do anything, fortunately, and they Rimrock here to get it through some extra damage. Now I think I just go for an Obsessive Stitcher, uses my mana well, and they just played the Rimrock, so hopefully Stitcher will have a block on the Fireblade Artist. So I try to do that. Unfortunately, they do have just the Trumpet Blast effect here on You See a Pair of Goblins, so they get through a couple extra damage. And yeah, the Stitcher is now dead, which means my plans of reanimating Waker of Waves or City Watch Sphinx are dead as well. So I go for Dusk Legion Zealot here, basically deciding that I don't want to Water Knot the Fireblade Artist because that sounds horrible. And fortunately I do find a Coil Bug, so rewarded for playing that Dusk Legion Zealot. Opponent attacks me for 1, fall to a pretty precarious 9 life against this Fireblade Artist, and they play Skullport Merchant, Merchant, another card from Adventures of the Forgotten Realms. You See a Pair of Goblins, I think, is a really nice, kind of reasonable card for this cube. Skullport Merchant might be a little unreasonable. This is one of the best cards in Adventures of the Forgotten Realms in the lower rarities, and in this sacrifice deck, it's just such a beating. So we kind of desperation get rid of this Waker of Waves here. We are a little bit close to being able to cast it, not super far away from 7 mana, but just trying to find some action at this point. And we do find a Crypt Lurker here. So I believe, oh yeah, I am a mana short of being able to do that. And I can't actually play the Water Knot this turn either. Not saying that I really wanted to play the Water Knot, but I believe what I should have done there was like tap Island and Swamp, and then if I find a double black card, I was actually looking for the -2/-2 Amass 2 card here. That's why I tapped the way I did. Then I could still play that, but I could use the pathway here to cast Water Knot if I really wanted to for some reason. So the opponent sacks the treasure. and draws a card. I take a damage from this freebooter. They have Brazen Wolves. And then here I sack this Omen of the Sea. I find an Air Cult Elemental, which I think I decided to top here. It's usually good to get this thing in play and just try to stabilize the board. Very awkward though. I don't want to bounce the Kitesail Freebooter, and I don't want to bounce the Skullport Merchant, so I basically have to bounce the Brazen Wolves, which isn't too bad. They consider sacking it and decide against it. They're still not sacking things to the Fireblade Artist, which is probably good for me. And they Blood Curdle now, which is pretty bad for me. Menace counter on the Freebooter. They're not even trying to get through on the ground, which probably makes sense. Though if they put the Menace counter on the Skullport Merchant, that's like pretty reasonable for them too. So yeah, if they do put the counter on the Skullport Merchant, then I have to double block if I want to prevent myself from taking the damage, and then that means that I'm losing that 1/1. So potentially some consideration for doing things differently from them. And so now, yeah, we draw Reign of Revelation. Things are looking very, very bad for me. I think looks like I'm tapping here for a Crypt Lurker. Yep. And I think I sack this Dusk Legion Zealot. Again, the awkward case of not really being able to sack the Durable Coil Bug, even though that's something I'd generally rather sacrifice just because I don't quite have the mana. So I get to Water Knot the Dread Malkin here, which basically means it deals me 2 damage from the Fireblade Artist. I'm assuming that's what's happening here now that my life total is getting pretty low. And it looks like that is what's happening, so I'm down to 5 life, 4 from this Kitesail Freebooter. And there's a Lampad, and that just means I'm dead. So Lampad, very good card for any sacrifice deck. And yeah, very satisfying kill, sacrificing the Lampad to itself with like exact mana and creatures to do it. And we're on to game 3. The matchup is not looking very good for me, but we'll see if I'm able to scrape things together in the final game. Alright, game 3, we do get to be on the play here. And we have a really, really good hand. Tons of removal, really good blue and black mana. Basically exactly what I want to see in this matchup. So opponent has a turn 1 Dread Malkin, and I have to decide whether I want to Mystic Subdual that or what. But I decide to play it a little bit conservatively here and just pass the turn, take the 1 damage, see what the opponent plays on turn 2. Looks like they are going to shock and then play a Lazotep Reaver. I don't want to spend a removal spell on that, but I would like to have a blocker for it, so I decide I'm going to use that Bleeding Edge on the Dread Malkin, which works pretty nicely and definitely makes me feel good about taking that 1 damage. Opponent now has Cycle a Desert, which means presumably some weird things going on with their mana as they play Songmed, Treachery tapped, and pass the turn. And now we find a Cauldron's Gift. We're not going to play Banewhip Punisher, of course. We find a Reign of Revelation, which I think I topped here. And we could just like fire off the Adamant Cauldron's Gift, just kind of hoping to find something powerful, but it seems like a random way to basically just lose the game, so not trying to do that. Opponent has Dance with Devils, which is a really, really sweet card. Very good in their deck, and the Devils can even attack into the zombie army, which is pretty annoying for me. Opponent goes for an attack with everything here. We're going to block their zombie army, which potentially we should have blocked that Lazotep Reaver instead. Not sure it makes a huge difference, but just something to think about. And then here they sack the Devil, so they trade a couple of their creatures for my 2/2. They're also attacking my life total with play like that. Oh, and looks like I discarded an island to the Reign of Revelation. You can see my hand is full of good spells. It's not like a very easy decision when it comes to that. And then here I think I go for a Mire's Grasp on that Lampad, so of course they get to sack it to itself. Drain me 1 more time. And then I play Durable Coil Bug, which blocks 1 of their creatures. Unfortunately doesn't really block the Devil. So the Devil hits me for 1 damage. and now I have Tatiova, but I don't have any green mana, which is not ideal. And so here I like tap and untap a bunch of times trying to figure out whether to play the Omen of the Sea main phase or just what to do here. I finally decide I just want to Mystic Subdual right away. So I Mystic Subdual on the Merchant. The Merchant cannot sack itself, but they can sack the treasure, so that's what's happening here. So down a card. In that interaction, they also have just a body on the battlefield still to sacrifice. So here now we get to Omen of the Sea in response to this freebooter. We find Aven Initiate and Waker of Waves, and I believe we wanted Waker, if I had to guess, but yeah. But it's pretty awkward that the Cauldron's Gift is now disappearing. We can use the Banewhip Punisher to get the Cauldron's Gift back at some point. And here I did decide to trade with the Devil because we are going to play, I think, a Crypt Lurker this next turn. Just have a better blocker. And so yeah, they play a Deathbloom Thallid. Now we play that Crypt Lurker. We discard the Waker of Waves, or no, actually we discard nothing here, which I think is pretty reasonable. Not the most common mode on this card, but sometimes you just need a 4-mana 3/4 blocker. Play the Overgrown Tomb tapped, so now if I find a land, I'm going to be able to go Tatiova into land, draw a card, or I can go Waker of Waves. Opponent has Malefic Scythe here. They equip the Deathbloom Thallid, and basically I have to block, which is pretty unfortunate. So they get a 1/1. They deal me a damage with their freebooter. They suit up their Saproling. So I miss my land drop. So I think I have to go for a Banewhip Punisher here. Yeah. And I put the counter on the freebooter, and my plan now is to try to prevent the most amount of damage by blocking something with the Banewhip, and then just sacking it to kill the freebooter. But they don't even attack with like a 3/3 Saproling, so I just sack the Banewhip, get that Cauldron's Gift back, which hopefully will be important and valuable for me. They have Vizier the Scorpion here, which is pretty good and also pretty annoying. Makes a Death Toucher, which I'm not going to be able to beat with a Waker of Waves. But now I have a nice play set up where I don't have to hit land number 7. I can just use that alternate mode on the Waker of Waves, the like card filtering mode, find Bloodchief's Thirst, which I can cast on that zombie army, and I can play Cauldron's Gift. So unfortunately still missing land 7, but I do get the Waker back, and I'm careful here not to use the Adamant, because I already know when I'm going to reanimate. It's like my best reanimation target, and I don't want to mill myself for no reason. I like already scried the Embalm card to the bottom of my library, and I already have Coilbug in my graveyard, so there's really not much value in doing that. And then yeah, I do just get rid of this Death Toucher, and it looks like things might be stable for me here. Opponent has Sanitarium Skeleton, and I do think I misplayed a couple times surrounding the skeleton. So here I think I just played a couple creatures. I think I played Dusk Legion Zealot into Geist of the Archives. Really awkward land draw because I don't want to go land into Tatiova. I want to go Tatiova and then land. So now I go Geist without playing the land. And it looks like things are stable, like I said, but I think I really needed to Water Knot this skeleton, because even though they can't kill the Waker here, they are just racking up counters on the Malefic Scythe. And the funny thing is, the skeleton's normally a 1/2, and its power is being shrunk by the Waker, but its power and toughness are being pumped by the Scythe. So theoretically, there's a point where it would be a 7/9, and then it and the Waker would just bounce off each other forever, which would be really funny. Spoiler alert, it's not going to come to that. So we scry, there's an Obsessive Stitcher on top, definitely keeping any good spell like that. And so we just go for the Tatiova here, I think. Yep. And even though it's a little bit greedy, we're just going to start playing lands, drawing cards, gaining life. I do think we have some ways to kill the Tatiova if we need to, but basically keep in mind that the ability is not a May. So it does get a little bit risky to play lands. And they have a Blood Curdle, unfortunately, on my Waker of Waves. The skeleton is now a 6/7 with Menace. And so yeah, just like really randomly horrible things happening to me. And so now I have to like double chump just to preserve my life total with the 0-4 and the 1-1. And my hope here is I'm going to be able to use that Stitcher to get back the Waker of Waves. So I play a land, draw a card, gain a life. Yeah, I do go for the Stitcher here. Can't decide how I want to do it. Oh, I guess first my play was going to be, yeah, just scry. So I put a couple islands to the bottom, and now I cycle, I think. Yeah, cycle to neutralize. Basically just like looking for some action. Though, in hindsight, I think I could have kept that neutralize in hand. Like, it doesn't do me that much more good cycling it than just keeping it. Especially when I am worried about getting thin on cards in the library. But here what happens is the opponent just goes for a relatively big attack. I decide I'm fine with the Tatyova dying, so I put it in front of something to block, but I can't afford to let the Stitcher die, so I'm a little bit of a coward with that one. Looks like the opponent didn't really have anything to punish me with it, they just had the Brazen Wolves. So now I think I get to, yeah, so I play land, gain a life, draw a card, play Spellkeeper Weird, or no, I just Water Knot the skeleton because it does have Menace, and that's still going to be annoying for me. And yeah, now rather than playing the Weird, I just pass. The opponent's going to attack with something big, and then I can sack the Stitcher here. So yeah, they attack with a 9-8. And I throw the Stitcher in front, and then before damage is dealt, I sacrifice it, get the Waker of Waves back. Alright, so the Waker of Waves is in play, we don't take any damage here. If they had like a run amok or something, of course we would die, but, you know, we would die to a bunch of stuff here. So, now we just pass, find a dead weight, and yeah, draw a card, gain a life. We find City Watch Sphinx, which just have to cast here. It's like my one kind of realistic way of trying to win this game. We have Spellkeeper Weird, which can get back the reanimation thing, and there's a chance I'm supposed to deadweight that Saproling, just as like the only thing it can really kill. But they just throw the Vizier in front of this Waker to try to make that Scythe even bigger. So they equipped the Brazen Wolves attack. It's attacking for 9. And I throw this Tatyova in front of it. I've decided I'm done drawing cards and gaining life with only 7 cards left in my deck. I'm getting very close to milling out, and I haven't even started pressuring my opponent's life total. It's turn 15. They have a Thallid Soothsayer, which is going to let them churn through their deck. It's also just horrible news for me because it means they're able to unlock that Sanitarium skeleton. It means that Skullport Merchant is finally going to do something. So here I get to attack with both, which might have been a little too greedy. But yeah, they are able to sacrifice a blocker. They take 5 damage. Killing them in the air is really my only hope at this point. And now I just get the Coil Bug back finally, after many, many turns of not having access to the Coil Bug. My plan here is to just use it to block the Brazen Wolves for a long time. And they have a Lava Coil on my Coil Bug, which, I don't know, is kind of funny just in terms of the language, but also really, really horrible for me because not being able to get the Coil Bug back is very bad news. So now I have to block the Saproling, still taking 4 damage. I have to sack this Spellkeeper Weird. We get Cauldron's Gift, which is pretty good in general, but in this particular spot is not looking great. They have the post-combat Forbidden Friendship once again, and a Goblin Banneret. And they even have an Orzhov Enforcer, so just tons of stuff from them. And they suit up the Enforcer. So yeah, things are looking very bad for me. So let's see. I decided to use this Cauldron's Gift. Very careful not to get Adamant and just mill myself out right away. Looks like I got Air Cult Elemental back, and I imagine I used that to bounce the Death Toucher, because I don't have any good blocks on that. And then I think I deadweighted this Goblin Banneret. And I think I attacked, yeah, just with the 5-4 here. And unfortunately, I cannot get back the Coil Bug because it's exiled, which means I'm going to have to start giving up these good creatures. And I actually, yeah, so I figure out what's in my library at this point. It's like, I think there are a couple creatures with flying. One of them is the 3/2 with Embalm. I don't remember what the other one is, but the point is that I remember bottoming the 2 islands after that, and there's one random card left in my deck, and I imagine it's just a land. I didn't look at my entire deck to figure it out, but decided to chump with the 3/6. Can't really win if I chump with the Waker. And I can attack my opponent, at least on board, to 5. But yeah, I do draw this Bark Channel Pathway, and really close to a win here, right? Because the opponent cannot quite gain life. And even though, yes, technically I do have an attack that would put them down to 5, there's not even, something I can do to make sure that happens. Because if they wanted, they could just sack the Orzhov Enforcer and get a Spirit, but instead they decide to kill me with that Spirit rather than chump blocking, which makes sense. It's not a particularly hard game for them to win, but yeah, this is probably the correct way to do it. And then technically, maybe there's a way I could have survived here for a turn or so longer if I didn't make this play, but really there's nothing I can do here. If I didn't make the attack, then they make the same play with the Spirit. It attacks as a 6/7, I have to chump with that. And then I would throw the Waker onto the Brazen Wolves, because that's a lethal threat. The Soothsayer is going to deal me a damage regardless. I go down to 2 life, they sack the Brazen Wolves. I chumped with my City Watch Sphinx, which is my win con, and they have the Rimrock Knight as well. So that would have been lethal with the Soothsayer. So yeah, really nothing I could have done differently in that game, I don't think, but really fun one to just play and watch. Alright, then here we are back for round number 3, and yeah, unfortunately our dreams of trophying have been crushed, but Crackshot had an amazing deck, we had an amazing match against him, so very happy about how all that went. Here, opponent looks to be on green-white, we keep a pretty reasonable hand, and we top deck Bleeding Edge, which is probably going to be really good against this Cron Wrangler, even if they have on turn 3 something with 4 power, which they apparently do not. Then I will be able to use that Bleeding Edge and kill the Cron Wrangler. And it looks like I cycle this Waker of Waves here, and we get to, I think, choose the Water Knot to put into our hand, and then the Aven Initiate goes to the graveyard, which is kind of sweet too. And yeah, I do go for the Bleeding Edge, which is pretty powerful, and now opponent has Crocodile of the Crossing, which unfortunately would have pumped that Cron Wrangler, which is now dead. So I do take some damage from that, but I think my play here is just to put a Crypt Lurker out, but maybe actually no, I think I sacrificed this zombie, because I'm really trying to find land number 5 for the Skylord. So yeah, get 2 damage out of the zombie, then sacrifice it, find a land. Opponent feels they cannot attack, and that's going to be very good for me. We just get to keep developing the board here. We're not going to attack either. Opponent has Spore Swarm. Not a bad card for the green-white deck, and they do have the Bredegard Stronghold, which they crack here, but they still feel like they can't attack. My double blocks on the Crocodile, the Crossing, are just a little bit too good, which is really good for me, of course. And so now I have a Dusk Legion Zealot, and I get to just hold up this Neutralize / Reign of Revelation and pass the turn, and at this point I feel like I can't really lose. So I go for the double block that I would have made last turn, but for some reason they didn't make this attack last turn, which indicates either they just drew a trick or had a trick last turn that they didn't have mana for. The tricks in this format are pretty cheap though, in general, but they go for a Blessed Light, which is not a combat trick, just a straight up removal spell. So we counter that one to prevent from getting 2 for 1 and make sure their creature leaves the battlefield here. Now we're in this pretty favorable board state where we can kind of do whatever we want. Draw this Tatiova, so we're happy to play that, start drawing cards, gaining life. Still don't even need to attack. Probably could have attacked with the zombie army for free, but they start using this Hash Up Oasis, which isn't even too rough against me. I still have a pretty good double block against that. They get rid of my 3/4, but I get to keep my 2/2. And now they play, that Paradise Druid. Get to keep going nuts with this Tatiova. Get to Coilbug into Stitcher into Spellkeeper Weird. So really just developing the board, triple spelling here on turn 8. And even a cheeky attack for 2 with the zombie army. And now the Hash Up Oasis, pumps up a Saproling, which swings in. And once again, I'm in the weird spot where I could block with the Coilbug, and it's technically better to do so, but I don't want to constrain my mana that much, so I'd rather just throw the Dusk Legion Zealot in front, which isn't doing very much anyway. So now I think, it looks like I attack with the 2 powered creatures. They trade a Paradise Druid for one of them, and there's a chance what I was supposed to do here is use the Obsessive Stitcher to reanimate the Waker of Waves at instant speed, and then I actually just eat their creature. But it doesn't really matter because I'm winning by so much at this point. Like, it would really take, it would basically just take something that's not in this cube for me to be behind. So now they have this Hill Giant Herd Gorger, which I don't really want to deal with. So I think I have exactly enough mana to sack the Spellkeeper Weird, counter this thing, and then still reanimate the Waker of Waves, so that's my plan here. So still gaining life, drawing a card, attack with everything, they chump block a couple things, and then I think I just embalm the 3/2 flyer from a million turns ago. Just pass, no need to play the Geist even. And the opponent has had enough here. Alright, back for game 2 of round 3 here. We have a really nice hand once again. Missing double blue, but otherwise just pretty good. Opponent has the Crunch Wrangler once again, a card that's really intended for the red-green deck, but not too bad here. I use the Mystic Subdual, thinking that even though it can mostly answer more problematic things, a 0/1 Crunch Wrangler is not really a big deal, and I can use the Grasp to kill potentially larger, more annoying things. So here I draw Dusk Legion Zealot, which is super annoying for that loathsome Chimera. It's not something you want to trade with if you don't have to. And I can use that Bark Channel Pathway to give me double blue for the Neutralize next turn, which is pretty nice. And they have a Humble Naturalist, which is a card mostly intended for like the blue-green ramp deck, but also the black-green deck. But not totally unreasonable in green-white either. And so the opponent now has a Voracious Typhon, which is not a card I want to have to deal with. Technically, I could do some funny stuff where I like put the Myers Grasp on it and play the Obsessive Stitcher, and then they have a 1/1, and I get to just bounce off my 0/3 forever. But I do just decide to counter this. They can get it back later as a 7/7, but not worried about that just yet. I get in for 1 damage, which isn't too bad. The other thing is they have multiple escape cards, so if they do get that Typhon back, it's making their Chimera worse. And I go for a Skylord here, thinking that next turn I'll go for the Tatiova plus land play. And now I have good board presence, they don't have any attacks anymore. They have Dawnfeather Eagle, which does change that a little bit, so I think, they attack with everything here. So I have pretty good blocks. Instead of trading my Dusk Legion Zealot for the Chimera, now I trade the Zombie Army for it, which is still pretty good for me. And now I trade the Dusk Legion Zealot for the Humble Naturalist by double blocking with the 3/3. So I take 1 damage from my trouble, make a couple trades that are slightly less than ideal, but still feel really good about my spot. Attack for 3 here, because I'm not really blocking that Dawnfeather Eagle. They chump with the Crunch Wrangler, which makes sense because they are trying to escape some stuff in their graveyard, but they don't quite have mana to do that for the Typhon yet. And now I draw Air Cult Elemental, which is ironically kind of a funny answer to Escaped Typhon. So now they have Prison Realm on the Tatiova, which is a good answer to it. It's going to prevent me from getting a bunch of value with it. And they do have an attack for 3. And I think this turn, I just attacked for 3 back. I think I played Myers Grasp and Stitcher. Let's see. Oh no, I went for a Rain of Revelation instead. And many lands. I think I just, discarded a random swamp, play the estuary tap, no need to give more information. And yeah, opponent just drops some mana dorks and passes, interestingly, without attacking with that druid. So here, I think, I just drop the 2 creatures that I can cast here. Yeah, didn't even attack for 3. Kind of worried about this Soroform hybrid because it can turn into a 6/6, but I do have a pretty reasonable double block on it with my 2 3-powered creatures, one of which I can get back. So the opponent goes for the Bredegaard Stronghold. It makes a really interesting attack with all their creatures, basically indicating that they have a combat trick. And so I'm thinking about like +2/+2, that kind of thing. Maybe +3/+3, I think Giant Growth is still in here. And so basically I decide that what I need to do here, I should block all 3 of the creatures. I should put my Obsessive Stitcher on the 2/4 because it doesn't make sense to put either of the other creatures on the 2/4 as opposed to putting them on a 2/2. So yeah, I guess basically my thought here is even though the Aven Initiate is better, the Skylord was going to survive, and I'd rather make it so they have to spend the combat trick killing a creature that would already die, rather than, killing a creature and saving their Land of War Elves and letting their better creature die. So pretty good and annoying blocks for me, I think. And then here, Omen of the Sea. We're just gonna keep the Spellkeeper weird. I think, now I did decide to go for this Air Cult Elemental, I think. Or no, I went for the Aven Initiate. And the idea now is that the opponent has to find a land just to turn the Soroform into a 6-power thing. But I am able to double block that if that's something they're willing to do here. Looks like their plan is going to be something else. Go for a Paradise Druid, which is going to give them 6 mana for next turn, or potentially 7 for that Voracious Typhon. And so now I just go for a Deadweight on this Soroform hybrid. And things are looking pretty good for me here. I get to attack for 3 in the air, loot away the Coil Bug, which is kind of a neat trick. And I think I just return it to hand and cast it here, which is like kind of unnecessary. I could just keep it in my hand if I want to do that trick with looting repeatedly. I think opponent goes for the Typhon now. Or no, they go for the Loathsome Chimera. Yeah, so I guess they're actually still missing a land. Oh yeah, because they played the Fortified Village tapped. That's really awkward. So even though they have 7 sources of mana, they didn't quite have the mana for the Typhon just yet. So now, I think I go for... Do I just go for the Banewhip Punisher here? I don't remember. Looks like it, yeah. And so I think I Banewhip on the Paradise Druid. Banewhip on creatures that have +1/+1 counters, not a very good play. So, good thing I didn't do that. And now that I'm putting this here, I think I'm probably using the Air Cult to, bounce that Chimera as well. Or no, I bounced the 2/4. And I think my thinking there is the 2/4 holds more creatures back, so now the Coil Bug, for instance, has a pretty good attack. So now I just get to be super aggressive. But I crack Omen of the Sea, find a Waker of Waves, and so now I can Cauldron's Gift that with Adamant, because I know I have that Waker of Waves on top, so I can just like dump that thing into play. Opponent just has a 1/3, like all my creatures are crashing in here, there's really nothing they can do. And that's just going to be game. So, really good performance with this Sultai Reanimation deck. I think I drafted it really pretty well. Only a couple picks I think I would make differently, even with hindsight. And yes, I did lose against Crackshot's really nutty red-black sacrifice deck, but I'm not even sure that's a winnable matchup for me. I got pretty lucky to steal the one game. And I put up like a 20-turn fight in game 3, so that was pretty nice as well. Possible that archetype is a little bit too strong, but in general, super fun draft. Really happy that everyone was able to participate. Thank you all for watching. Hope you have enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon.